there is a much deeper perspective that I'll just touch on, not wanting to get too deep here, in relation to the understanding of the mind from the yogic perspective. And I'm going to read a couple of verses here from the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali. And it says in the 4th pada, or the 4th chapter, in the 19th shloka or verse, the mind is not self-illuminating, being itself an object of perception. So what they're referring to here, in the Sanskrit terminology, it means that which is knowable. So they make a distinction between the knower of things and that which can be known, or that which is knowable. So you can observe your mind, you can look at the way it's functioning. Even when it's on a rage, you can step back from it and observe what's going on, which clearly indicates that you are not the mind. If you were not the mind, you couldn't do that. But the fact that you have that capacity, it shows you something of the nature of the mind. They refer to it as being not self-illuminating. It's not shining knowledge on itself. Somebody else is the observer. Not being self-luminous, the mind cannot be aware of an object in itself as the perceiver and perceived at the same time. Of course, that's going to sound pretty odd, perhaps, to some people, but it has to do with the yogic practice. One of the central focuses of almost all yogic practice, by different methodologies and by different practices, was to actually gain control of the mind. And in some of the meditation that was practiced, there was this attempt to really seize the mind and to examine it and to bring it into a state of non-activity. And there was this awareness in these exercises of how the mind is not self-luminous. I won't go any further on that one. In the next verse, it states, the pure and transcendental consciousness of the Atma, or the self, or the soul, is unchangeable. The consciousness is unchangeable. When the mind receives a reflection of that consciousness, it is able to perceive and appears like the seer. So that's a really extraordinary idea to contemplate upon. That the mind, it's just like, let's look at the body for a moment. You know, the understanding is that it is because of the presence of the Atma, the spiritual being or the soul, that the body manifests symptoms of life and appears to be like a person. But as soon as that living being, that life force, that spiritual person leaves, the body is instantly, it's called dead. And it is no longer attractive, and it instantly begins to start decomposing and transforming and breaking down. And from that, one can, by their own observation, understand that that which has left the body is not just an energy, but it's the actual person that is left. The mind is also categorized as a material energy, and it's because of the presence of the spiritual being and its proximity to the mind, that the mind now becomes activated and it begins to take on the characteristics of the perceiver. Whereas in reality, the understanding that one can cultivate and come to see is that the perceiver is not the mind. The mind is like a movie screen that, a movie can be projected onto and reflected, and people can sit in the theater and see it. In a similar way, the perceptions that come in through the senses are reflected on the mind. The mind is not doing the perceiving, but there is another entity within the seer, drishya, that is actually doing the seeing. So the mind being able to perceive due to the reflecting both the Atma, or the self, and the objects of perception appears to comprehend everything. Even though the mind has accumulated various impressions and desires of various types, it is always at the disposal of the Atma, or the self. This is because the mind cannot function without the power of the perceiver.